Stanford University.
All right, guys. Welcome to Lecture 13, CS193P. We've got another guest lecturer today, so obviously it's going to be awesome and exciting and everything because, you know, Alex is here, so who's not going to celebrate, really? I mean, obviously. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Address Book, but before we get into that, just a couple of announcements. Paparazzi 3 is due tomorrow at 11:59, so, you know, feel free to get started on that tonight or tomorrow morning, whenever you get a chance. And Paparazzi 4 will be posted soon and is obviously due next Wednesday, no surprise there. So the last assignment, the last part of the Paparazzi project. After that, we're going to be getting into all of the individual projects, which hopefully you've gotten started thinking about proposing. Proposals are also due tomorrow night, so if you haven't gotten those in yet, get us your proposals, and we'll get through them, check them out, and get back to you on how that's going. So due tomorrow night. Handout is on the website. If you still need an idea, we've said this a couple times, but we do have some folks from the campus community and other folks, like even outside campus, that have sent us ideas that they're hoping to have people work on. So if you're not really sure what it is you want to do or don't really have an idea, send us an email, let us know, and we can get you some of those proposals. And yeah, we'll be responding with feedback as soon as we get a chance to look through them. So with that, I'm going to give it over to Alex to talk about Address Book.
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon. So my name is Alex, and I'm going to talk to you about Address Book, the Address Book APIs today, as well as a little bit about Core Foundation. And we're going to start with a little demo about how to. Oops, sorry, I went a little quick in the slides there. All right, we're going to actually start this whole Address Book thing with a demo. So I'm going to write a small application that includes Address Book. Excuse me. So this is essentially the very basic template that's all created from code. As you can see, this is the application delegate, and the application did finish launching. All it does right now is create a AB person view controller. That's a class provided by Address Book UI. And I'm going to go fairly quickly over all these, but I'll explain it to you in just a bit. So we create this person view controller, and then put it as the root view controller of our UI navigation controller, and release it. And then we had the view of the navigation controller to our window. And what we end up with is this beautiful little, quite useless view right there, but beautiful title, and so we have a little view and a photo that's not very useful. So I'm going to go back, and now we're actually going to do something slightly more interesting. So in here, I've got lots of code commented out, because I like to not write the code while I'm demoing. So all I'm going to do here is create a person, AB person create, set a couple of values, the first name, as you can see here, a first name, last name, and set that person. Let me actually move that aside. Totally not what I wanted to. So move that aside. Yeah, there we go. So we have a person. We're creating a person here, setting a couple of values, the first name and the last name, setting that person on the person view controller. What that does is slightly more interesting than before. Not that much, though. We have a name now. Excellent. And the last thing, which is probably the most interesting part, we're going to set this little property on there. The brackets are here just so I can collapse the code. Don't worry about them. And once we do that, we get just one little extra thing at the top, which is this edit button. So once we click the edit button, we have essentially the entire UI of Address Book in there. We can add photos. If we have photos, we can add a phone number, enter a phone number, pick labels, etc. So we can do the whole thing that pretty much Address Book provides here. Add emails, add other fields. As you can see, you have a fairly extensive UI by just flipping that one little switch there. So there we go. Most of Address Book right there in that one little class. All right, so that's the very, very quick demo. Again, we have maybe 15 lines of code, and we got half of the Address Book application in there. So that was a quick, easy way to put contact and people and edit people information in your application. Again, we're just creating a person, setting a couple properties, adding this AB person view controller to our stack, and then we have this entire UI in there. So how does that work? We're going to see that in a minute. First, we're going to talk a little bit, do a little detour, and talk a bit about Core Foundation. You've heard about Foundation by now, and now we're going to talk about Core Foundation. What's the main difference? It's a lower level framework that's all in C. So no more Objective-C. Core Foundation is all C-based. It's fairly similar. You have a lot of the same classes and objects. When you have a NS dictionary in Foundation, you're going to find a very similar construct, the CF dictionary ref in Core Foundation. Similarly to Foundation, you have to retain and release. So use CF retain, where you would use the retain message, CF release, where you use the release message. Why are we talking about this? Well, Address Book is a C framework. The Address Book, the low-level Address Book framework, is all written in C and all based on Core Foundation. So it uses the Core Foundation type, CF string instead of NS string, CF array instead of NS array, etc. There's one little extra thing to remember. Typically in Foundation or in Objective-C in general, when you're creating an object or instantiating a new object, you're going to call alloc init. And you're responsible then for releasing that object. The way this works in Core Foundation is any function that has create in its name, well, it returns a retained object. So you're going to be responsible for releasing it. One example that we did not see there is address book create, AB address book create, creates a retained object. AB person create that we did see in the little sample also creates a retained object. So it's a very basic of Foundation, of Core Foundation. In addition, there's a nifty little thing in that Core Foundation provides, the Core Foundation and Foundation provide, which is toll-free bridging. It's mostly free bridging. Which means that you can use a CF object, a Core Foundation object, and cast it to a Foundation object. So in this example, strings, arrays, dictionaries, you have a CF string in Core Foundation, an NS string in Foundation. You can actually use them interchangeably. One can be used where the other one would be used. So if you have a method that takes as an argument an NS string, and you just obtain a CF string for the address book framework, for example, you can cast the CF string ref to an NS string star and pass that along. We'll see a few examples of that a little later, or right now. That was very quick. So in this case, for example, the first method is, the first function call is address book copy people with name. That returns a CF array, so an array that's in the Core Foundation world. And you can actually cast it easily, like we see in the log statement here. Cast it in an array and call messages on it. So CF array, NS array both know how to deal with the count message. Similarly, the same one, you have a CF array, you want a mutable copy of it, you can just cast it and call mutable copy on it. And then CF release. One thing you note here is that we're checking for null before calling CF release here. This is very important. CF objects, you cannot pass null to any of the CF functions. And the same is true for all the address book calls. So before you release the array, check that it's not null. Or cast it to an NS array and then call release on it if you really don't want to check for null. Oh wait, I already explained all that. There you go. Check for null. Wait, just can I repeat it? Yeah, that's another thing. Nil typically is used in Objective-C. Null is used in CF. Technically, they're somewhat interchangeable, so you can do, you can use one or the other. By convention, we'll use null when in Core Foundation world, and we'll use nil in Foundation. Yes?
Why isn't this framework in Objective-C? What's the reason for that?
The question was, why is this framework not in Objective-C? And as I've told Josh, it's because Josh likes C, and we wanted to please Josh. That's a joke. There's a few historical reasons for it, and it's one of the sort of low-level frameworks, just like Core Graphics is also a C framework, address book, happens to be a C framework as well. Not saying that one day it won't be made in Objective-C, but can't guarantee that. So, all right. That's just a little example of, check for null. Again, check for null. If you don't check for null and pass null to a CF release, it will crash immediately. It'll be fairly easy to track down. So, yeah. Toll-free bridging, don't forget that. There are a bunch of things that are easier to do in Foundation than they are in Core Foundation, and vice versa. There's some things that are difficult to do in Foundation that just have functions available in Core Foundation. So don't forget, you can actually bridge one type to the other. All right, and with that, a little reminder of the toll-free bridging. You can cast one to the other, easy. You can use auto-release. Oh yeah, that's something people do forget. You can call auto-release on your CF-created object. That works just fine as well. Typically, all the methods that are declared by NSObject can be called on the CF object directly. All right, with that, let's get back to address book and go do something a little more interesting than just the hello world of address book. So we're going to do social networking site, one of those sites with photo posting or one of those things. And what does that mean? We have people on the web. In this case, people who are posting photos. We have people on our iPhones or iPods. We want to actually take those two sets of people and sort of merge them and show one unified list for all the people. What does that entail? What are we going to have to do this? The first step is going to be downloading the people, downloading a list of people we have on the web. That is the first step, and that's also the step I'm not going to talk about because you've been talking about it. And by now you should have a good idea of how to do it, hopefully, if they've done the job right. So the next step is to actually identify what people are matching between what we have on the web, what we've just downloaded, rather, and what we have on the phone. So that's step 2, which is actually going to be called step 1 throughout the whole thing, and that's searching. Then this data we're downloading from the web, we're actually going to update our local contacts with it. So we're downloading information, photos or URLs or a middle name that we don't have in address book. We're actually going to add this to the address book. So we're going to update the local records with the data from the internet. And finally, we're going to display that list of contacts. So how is that going to work? First step, again, step 2, step 1, 2, I don't know. We're going to search. How do we search? We get the address book, and then we search. It's pretty easy. And there are 2 function calls for this. AB address book create, and then AB address book copy people with name. So in this case, we're only going to do matching on the name. So if I download Josh Schaefer from Flickr and have a Josh Schaefer in my address book, then we can match those 2. So the first thing we're going to look at here is the AB address book create and this AB address book ref in there. If anybody has any question, feel free to interrupt. So yes,
So
I was kidding. I didn't mean for you to interrupt. No.
So are you creating a reference to the iPhone's main address book? You're not like building a new address book, right? This is
right, and this is exactly what we're going to get into right now. So the address book we are creating, in this case, we're just calling AB address book create. That creates an instance of this object, AB address book ref, and that object is a new instance of something that lets you access the user's contacts on the phone. Meaning you can have multiple instances of that object, this AB object, but they will all access the central database with all the contacts. So that is where the AB address book ref is your starting point. You need that in order to get to any of the people, any of the groups, change any data or anything. So this is the first important step. Once you have an address book, the main focus here is people. So we need to actually get to a person. What is a person in the address book framework? It's this AB record ref. That's a record in the database. You're going to get a record. And that record is a lot of properties, a collection of properties. Yeah. And those properties, they're things like first name, last name, you have a picture, you have a bunch of email addresses, etc. And yes, there's a link, a URL in the email field. Oops. So I'm talking about properties. What are those properties? There's a bunch of different types of properties. There's strings for first name, last name, typically, will be strings. For things like a birthday, you'll have a date. And then we have more complex data. For images, we have just an NS data or a CF data. And for addresses, street addresses, we have dictionaries that represent, the different parts of a street address, meaning the street, the city, the zip code, etc. All those different things are defined in the AB person header. So you can look at the header for the entire list of all the properties that are supported. The first kind of property we're going to talk about are the very, very simple ones. The first name, the last name, the birthday. All those things you typically only have one of, unless you have two birthdays somehow. But I don't know how that works. So again, all those things are core foundation types, meaning the first name is going to be a CF string, the birthday is going to be a CF date, and so on. To get at the values, AB record copy value, that looks like this. It takes a person as argument and the name of the property. So it's this abstract function that lets you access any sort of data. You specify what property you want, the first name, the last name, the birthday, the notes, whatever you want, and you're going to get the value back. The different types of the different properties are also defined in the header. So look at the header, and you'll know what type you should expect from that property. In order to set values, there's a very similar method, AB record set value, very straightforward. In this case, we're setting the birthday, and all we're doing is creating a date, and then calling AB record set value, passing the person, the birthday, the actual new date, and there's an error parameter at the end. You can get, if for some reason it fails, some data sources like Exchange, for example, don't support quite the same set of data, quite the same amount of things that maybe MolMe supports. So depending on the source this record comes from, you might be able or might not be able to set that value. And that will be returned in the error. You'll know if it worked or not. But in most cases, you don't necessarily need to worry about that too much. So that's get value, copy value, set value, and that's it. Then the more complicated properties are the multi-value properties. You have things like phone numbers or emails. Most people actually have more than one email address. If you're like Josh, you have a stack of 16 iPhones on your desk, you might have 16 phone numbers you need to remember. So this is an example. In this case, as you can see, we have an AB multi-value ref. That's this container for values. And we have two things associated with each entry in that AB multi-value ref. A label, so we can say iPhone number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 16, and a value, which is typically going to be, in this case, the phone number. So the multi-value ref contains all those things and allows us to use AB record copy value to just get at that data. And take a look quickly at how that works. The AB multi-value ref, again, an object, it has a count. So you can query how many phone numbers, how many phones does Josh have. In this case, you've gotten the value with AB record copy value, you've gotten a multi-value ref, you get the count, tells you 16, and then you move on to actually get the values. How you get the value? Again, we're dealing with the multi-value we got from AB record copy value. So you get at the value by just calling AB multi-value copy value at index. Typically, you'll access the multi-value by index. So you'll run through all the different values and get run through the different indices and get the different values. Again, fairly simple. You get a CF type ref. All those are also defined in the AB person header. Typically for a phone number, and for most multi-values, you'll get strings back. In this case, the value is going to be a string for the actual phone number. Then there's a label. I mentioned that. You can actually, assign a label to all the different values. You can say it's my home phone, my cell phone, my fax machine, my car mobile, something, my pager, etc. So you can have a label. And it's very similar to the previous one. The label is always a string, and you get it through AB multi-value copy label at index. The last little bit that's interesting on the multi-value, I mentioned we're mostly accessing them by index. There's also an identifier available. Typically, if the user adds or removes a value, a phone number, then all your indices are going to change in the multi-value. But the identifier is handy because it will not change. If I have 5 phone numbers and remove number 3, then they're still going to the 4 that are left are going to maintain their identifiers. So in this case, the identifier actually is also an index, is also an integer. Type as a CF index. CF index is a type for integer. So be careful not to pass the identifier as the index and the index as the identifier. That's got to be the most frequent bug I get back from developers. They're like, oh, this doesn't work. Yes, the index, the identifier, just sometimes get mixed up. So most functions I get are using the index. So if you have an identifier, get the index for that identifier first. Through AB multi-value, get identifier and index. There's a parallel method or opposite method function that will get you, I'm going to get that right, that will get you the index of a particular identifier. And I have a hard time with it. All right, so those are the basic functions on AB multi-value. And that's all we had to do for searching, how to get the data. And now we need to actually push that data. We download all the data from Flickr, Facebook, whichever social networking site you're using today. And we're going to update the records in the address book. How are we doing that? Well, the AB multi-value ref is actually immutable. It's just like the NS array. You can't add an object to a basic NS array. So the first thing we're going to have to do is mutate that value, make a mutable copy of it. Then we're going to add the value, the actual URL. Let's say we're downloaded. Set that multi-value back on the person. Once you've gotten a value from a person, you can do whatever to that value until you set it back on the person. That person hasn't been updated. It's another common mistake of, oh, I've changed everything, even saved the address book, nothing's happened. If you don't set it back and push it back to the person, nothing's going to happen. So once we've set it, save the address book. The code looks something like this. It's not too complicated. We've got the URLs from a person. So through AB record copy value, we have an AB multi-value ref. We're going to mutate it by calling AB multi-value create mutable copy. At that point, we have an AB mutable multi-value ref. That one can be modified. And all we need to do is add the value and label. So AB multi-value, add value and label. We're putting a new multi-value. We're passing the multi-value and the new value and the label. For the people who are keeping close attention to this, this is a C string that's being passed. That if you copy and paste that, that's not going to work. But missing a little @ sign from the different strings to make them NS strings rather than C strings. Guess I should try to compile this someday. The next thing, once you got that, you set the value back on the person, and finally you save. AB address book save. Can also return to you an error if something bad happened. All right, so that's pretty much all we need for updating.
What's social? Is that the name of the URL?
Social. What is social in the AB multi-value add value and label? It's the label part of the thing. We're just calling it social. It's any label you want. And there are a number of predefined labels in the AB person header as well, things like home, work, etc. But in this case, you can put whatever value you want in there. Any other questions? All right, so that was step 2. It's pretty much done. And step 3 is displaying. How are we going to display all this data we got from the address book as well as from the internet, our little social networking site? There are a few steps to displaying it. Hopefully we want to put them in the right order. We have this list of people. We want to sort through them. That would probably be good. Rather than some random order, we downloaded them from the web service. We want to display something meaningful, the name to the user. That would be good. Probably first name, last name, the way they like it. And then we actually want to put them in a table view and draw something on the screen. So how do we do this? The first thing, sorting. As I found out, it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was at first. All sorts of languages have interesting rules for sorting people and names. So don't worry about it too much. We'll do it for you. We have a nice little function in the address book framework that does most of it. AB person compare people by name will actually do most of the sorting. Take two people, figure out their first name, their last name, their middle name, their prefix, if it's a company rather than a person, etc., and sort them accordingly. The only other thing you need to worry about is the AB person get sort ordering. That's actually the user's preference for the order in which they want people to show up, whether they should be sorted alphabetically by last name or first name, for example. So those two functions should get you sorting the list fairly quickly. And that's how it's going to look. This is the core foundation version of it. Say we got an array of people. We have to make a range because that's the way the CF array sort works. And then we get the sort ordering and call CF array sort values. We pass the array. That has to be mutable at that point. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. Pass the range of people we want to sort in that array. And then the function that we're going to use to sort that array. So you can just pass the function that's provided by address book. And the last argument is actually important. It's defined to be the sort ordering in our case. For that function, the AB person compare people by name is expecting the context, so that last void star at the end, to actually be the sort ordering. So don't forget that one. And for those who are going to find out they're allergic to C, unlike Josh, there's an Objective-C version, which actually is significantly simpler, but hides a little typecasting that needs to happen, that you'll probably find out about if you try to use it. Here, there needs to be a little bit of typecasting before the AB person compare people by name. And that will be in the sample code, actually. So again, you have a mutable array. You can just call sort using function. The same context needs to be passed in. All right, and that's all we need to do for sorting. The next one is getting the name. How do you get the name from a record? Again, it sounds as simple as, take the first name, the last name, put them together with space. And every now and then it's a little more complicated. You need to figure out if it's a company, if it's got a prefix, suffix, etc. How the user prefers to see their names. If it's last name first, first name last. I think there's a difference between those two. Yes.
Why do you have sort ordering typecasted in the word star?
So on the previous slide, this one, builds. CF array sort values actually takes a void star context at the end. And that context is passed to the sorting function. And in this case, the AB person compare people by name function expects that context to be the sort ordering. So you can change it. It doesn't have to use the default one, the system one. But in order to change it, you need to pass it in.
Normally, something like sort ordering would be a constant.
The sort ordering is an integer. The question was normally the sort ordering would be a constant. And it is. It is defined as a constant. And when you get it from using AB person get sort ordering, you do get this AB person ordering type back, which is an integer. And there are 3 values defined, I think. None, first, and last, or something. So it is an integer you're passing in.
The casting is just to make the CFRA like happy, right? I mean, you're not actually hoping to treat that as a website.
Right, like Joe said, the casting is just to make this whole thing compile and CFRA sort values happy. We're not treating it as a pointer to anything. All right. Good. All right. So again, getting the name, as I was saying, we actually have a function for that, AB record copy composite name, and it looks like this. You get a CF string out of it. And again, if you don't like C, you can just do exactly the same thing and cast it to an Objective-C type and an S string. And then you do something with the name, like display it. And we're actually going to take a look at that. So this is the previous application. We're going to do this. Well, cheat sheet at the bottom. So right now, all we have is pretty much the bare bones app that has a table view in it called My Friends. It's kind of sad. So I'm going to add some friends. I'm going to make up some friends. So I have already written a couple of classes in here. There's the usual app delegate that doesn't do much except instantiate the social people table view controller. And then there's the social people table view controller, subclass of UI table view controller. I'm just going to keep playing with the size of everything in there. So it has an address book, has this magical web service class that I wrote. It's quite fancy. And no, you will not find any answers to any of the exercises because it only hard codes everything. So, but the web service class vends me a couple of things, an array of web people, and all those web people are web persons. So they have a first name, a last name, and a URL. And yes, the whole source code fits in like a page and hard codes 5 people. So, all right, so that's all the classes in this little app. Back to the interesting one, the table view controller. It has a few interesting methods that we're going to look at. The first one is the people method. And that's used throughout to actually figure out a list of people to display. So what we're going to do in here is actually ask the web service to download the data, or rather to give us the data. So that's what we do. We get our web service, get our web people, and iterate over the different web people. The next thing we need to do is actually search for matches in the address book. And yes, I'm copying and pasting everything. Nice. So we search for the people. Let me remove this little pane so we have a little more room for the code. We search for people. We build a full name. Right now we're just going to put the 2 strings next to one another because that's how the AB address book copy people with name works. It takes a first name and last name. It can be partial first name and last name, and we'll actually find all the matching people in the address book. So we take the web person's first name, the web person's last name, put them in a string, and then pass that to address book and ask for anyone who matches. Again, you see other examples of casting, CS string and NS strings. It's all a happy family. So we've gotten matches from address book, hopefully, and we're going to go ahead and do something with those matches. There we go. So if we have gotten any matches, we're going to count those matches and take the first one. We're going to skip over the whole, oh, I have 4 people called John Smith thing. We're not going to do that. So just going to avoid the whole problem, get the first one, and be done. And eventually, what we want to do is add them to this people object that we're going to return and display. So So that's all good. We've searched, we've found, hopefully, and we've matched those people and added them to our array. Array. The next step is to update. So in order to update, if we have a person, we need to get the URLs. Again, our little web service only gives us a URL. We want to push that URL into the local context. So we're going to get the URL from the existing person, then mutate that URL, make a mutable copy of that multi-value. So we copy the person, the URL. If we have URLs, we're going to make a mutable copy, then release it. We can release the original URLs because we don't need them anymore. And yes, the indentation is a little wacky at the moment. I'm going to fix that in just a second. And if we don't have any URLs on that person, meaning there are no existing URLs on that person, we're going to just create a mutable multi-value ref that's going to contain strings. That's so that we can store the new URL. And the last thing we're going to do in here is add the value to that mutable URLs multi-value. So we get the web person's URL string, give it a label. Again, that can be any label you want. In this case, we'll stick to social for now. And that was a comment that wasn't supposed to be pasted in here. And we're going to set that multi-value back on the person. Once we're done with that, we can release the mutable URLs multi-value. With that, the third step in our display was to actually sort the people. Or was it the first step in our display? It was the first step in our display. So we're going to sort those people. This is a tricky one. I need to figure out where to put it. It's after we've iterated over all the people, although the web people. I'm actually going to collapse this whole iteration. Then we're going to sort. This is a little typecasting I was talking about. Yeah, you can just copy and paste that. The type that sort using the Objective-C sort using function is expecting is a function that returns an S integer and takes ID void star, which is actually exactly the same as what this function is, but the compiler gets in the way. So the context, again, every person gets sort ordering. So that will get us to actually download the list, update the local people, sort them, and we're good. The next thing we need to do is actually display them. And for that, we're going to go to a little method that's probably familiar, the self-forward index path. And all we're going to do is get the person for that row and take its name and display that as the text for the cell. So this is all this is doing. We're creating a cell if we didn't get one. Actually, this is wrong. Josh, you didn't even correct me on this. If we don't have a cell, we're going to create one and then get the person at its index, get that person's composite name, set it as the text on the cell, and then release the name. All right, with all that, we should be able to build and run. Oh, set text is deprecated. Nice. Was it text label? There we go. Set text is deprecated, but text label, the text is not. Nice. See that I've updated this recently. All right, now we have 2 friends. That's better than 0. Not quite right though. There's one thing we didn't do in here. We're only adding to our people's array the people we found in the address book. But there are people who are available on the web service, and I know for a fact that I hard-coded 5 people in there. There are people in the web service that are not in the address book. So we can go back to our cute little iteration here. If we didn't actually find a person in the address book that matches, we can actually just make one up. So this is what we're going to do here. Ooh, and the first part. All right. So person, if we don't have a person, excuse me, is that right? I messed up the whole indentation now. All right, that's going to be it somehow. I think I might have an extra bracket somewhere. We'll see if that compiles. So if we don't have the person, can I collapse this? Oh, yes. If we don't have the person, meaning we didn't find that person in the address book, we can create it, set a value, the first to the last name that we get from the web service, create a mutable copy, add the value and label, set the value, essentially do the same thing. And now we have a person, so we can add that person to the array. And thinking I might have missed something here. Yes, I didn't misplace this statement. Oops. Excuse me while I fix my code. There we go. That should be it. Now when we run, we should have the 5 people I was expecting. So 2 of them are in the address book. 3 of them are not actually in the address book. All right. So that's a little demo. Any questions? So the question was, do these people that we were just creating get added to the address book? No. There's a function to add a person to the address book. Unless you add that person to the address book, it's not going to be added to the user's address book. But it's a handy way to actually deal with people, objects, without necessarily having to add them to the database. So you can still do everything exactly the same way. Your code, whether the person is in the address book or is not in the address book, your code is exactly the same because you're still dealing with people. So with the same people reference, person reference.
What does that address book save function do? You did call it, right, at the end?
Yes. So the address book save, the question was, what does the address book save function do? Actually, I'm pretty sure I don't call it anywhere here because I didn't want to destroy my local database. Because that would prevent me from doing the demo more than once. But if you wanted to commit those changes to the address book, and I'm talking about all the AB records set value and all those things, when we added the URL and all those, you would have to call AB address book save. So there we go. All right. So that was the little demo. Again, we're searching for the people, updating the local people, and then displaying them. That's pretty good, but that's not a very exciting list. It would be nice to actually be able to show the details of all those people. So you've probably seen those nice little blue chevrons in there, and actually show all the data, and including the data from the local address book and the data that was merged in. So we can actually just add that. In order to add that, we're going to go back to this class I mentioned at the very beginning, the AB person view controller. It's got 3 properties that are interesting. In this case, the displayed person, what person to actually show. The displayed properties, you can decide that you only want to show phone numbers and email addresses for some reason. Or you can just show them all and not worry about it. And whether to allow editing. That's what gives you the little edit button. You can let the user change everything after that. So that's one thing for the people who are in your address book. For the people who are not in your address book, probably be nice to actually allow the user to add them to your address book. So how do we do that? Well, you have those 2 little buttons that you've probably seen in the recent phone calls. If it's a phone number that you don't have, that kind of thing, or an email, you're receiving an email, you can view that email address, and then you can add that person to your address book with those 2 little buttons, create new contact or add to an existing contact. How do we do this? We have another view controller available that's very, very similar to the person view controller. And it's the unknown person view controller. Again, display person, and one extra flag allows adding to address book, and a delegate method, because you need to hear when that person is actually added. The delegate just tells you this contact was actually added to the address book, and this is the DAB record ref, the person you're getting back. And it could be the same person you originally had. It could be a different one in the case where the information you gave it was actually added to an existing contact. You might actually get a completely different person from the one you set as the displayed person on the view controller. I'm actually going to show you that very quickly, because it's a lot more exciting as far as address book goes. So what are we going to do here? We're going to add an accessory view. Let me collapse a few of these. We don't need the people method anymore. And we're going to add an accessory view on our UI table view. How many of those methods are going to be deprecated? All right. When we run this, all we're going to get is the same list with little accessory views that don't do anything. So I'm going to go back and make this. Whoa, nice. Okay. All right. So is that going to work? So if you're developing for iPhone 2.0, this will be better. So hopefully this still works. In order to, when the button is tapped, we're going to get a callback and a big red log in the console. And all we want to do is get that person and present a person view controller for it. So we're going to get a callback from the index path. We're going to get that person's record ID. And this is not something I've talked about, but every record has a record ID. If that record is not in the address book database, it's going to be to have an invalid record ID. If that person is in the address book database, it will have not the invalid ID. So it will have some record ID. So the next thing we do is create a person view controller, set the displayed person, allow editing, because why not? And then we push that view controller onto the navigation controller stack. And then we're done with that person view controller, so we can release it. So that's good for people we know. For the unknown people, because we want to allow the user to add them to the address book, we're going to use the other view controller, the AB unknown person view controller. And the process is very, very similar. We're going to create one, set the displayed person, allow adding to address book, because why not? And then push that view control in the stack. When we run this, we have a little buttons. John Appleseed is on the web service, so I get all of John Appleseed's information, and not only the information from the web service, which is only the first name, last name, and the URL, as you saw in my beautiful hard-coded classes, but also all the information from the local address book, the phone numbers, etc. And then Adrian is not on my address book, but is in the web service. So now I get an unknown contact. I'm allowed to create new contacts. So I can create a new contact from there. I can add him to an existing contact, etc. I can navigate the groups and do all those things that you would expect to do. Again, with fairly small amount of code in there. The person view controllers offer quite a bit of functionality in them.
So when you add him to an existing contact, obviously the existing contact has a different name. So is it just adding the URL to that contact?
So the question was, when you add that person to an existing contact, what happens with the names and the fields that are already there? As much as possible, we try to merge all the data for you. So any missing information will be added, meaning if they have the same name, the name should not be added. But if one has an image, the other one doesn't, the image should be added, etc. So we'll add, it's an additive merge. We'll add all the information we can to that record. Does that answer your question?
The name that was already in your address book won't change.
The name that was in my address book will not change. Okay. That's correct. In this case, we're matching on names, so all the names matched to start with. All right. I'm showing the people. You can display existing people with the AB person view controller when you need to be able to let the user add to their address book AB unknown person view controller. That's another topic. What happens when your download takes too long or the search takes too long because you have 155,000 contacts in your address book? And I've had that somehow, somebody using the address book with 150-some thousand contacts. So what if it takes too long to search? Because at that point, it will take a little while to search the contacts database. Well, you can use threading. You can use NSThread, pthread if you really want, if you're really courageous. And you can do things in the background. So you can put that search in the background. What does that imply for address book? Well, there's something that's very important to remember if you need to do things in the background in address book. You cannot use the same address book instance on both threads. It's very similar to what core data does, where you cannot use the same manage object context in two different threads at the same time. So the AB address book, you create a new instance of the AB address book. And this is why you're allowed to create as many instances of AB address book as you want, and they all go back to the same database. What this also means is that you cannot pass people between threads. If you have an AB record that you got in the background thread that's searching, you cannot pass that AB record back to the main thread and use it there. Or rather, you cannot pass that record back and use it in both places. Terrible things will happen. And so what you can actually pass is the name, for example. If you're just looking for name, if you're looking for email addresses, you can pass those email addresses back. The other thing is, if you need the whole record, pass the record ID back and get that person from your main thread address book using its record ID. All right. So any questions on the threading? No? All right. Some other use of the address book framework you can do is actually adding people, to an existing app. And there are a few interesting classes to do this. I'm going to do a very, very quick demo of this. You can actually pick a person and say, send an email. You have an app that's doing cool things, editing images or doing cool things, and you want to email that person and tell them about it. So how are you going to do this? In this case, we're going to do a little quick demo, create an email button, pick a person, and then send an email to that person. How is that going to work? Well, for picking people, we have another view controller, the AB People Picker Navigation Controller. What's going to happen is when the user presses on send email, we're going to bring up that people picker, we're going to pick a person, and then we're going to send the email. How does that work? You have this new navigation controller type, you present it, and then you implement the delegate. And that's pretty much all you need to do. The delegate has 3 callbacks: the cancellation, the selection of a person, and the selection of a particular value. Here's a little bit of code for it that's already written. I'm going to show you in 6 seconds. All right, so this is the old demo and the new demo. All right, so we have essentially a very basic app with our little people picker demo app delegate thing and a little root view controller. The root view controller has just a button. It's actually all made in IB. You can download the sample code and take a look if you want. And what it does is implement the people picker delegate callbacks. The should continue after selecting person, and the should continue after selecting person property identifier. That's what happens when you click on a particular email address. I'm not going to go into details over what it does here, but essentially, when the user selects a person, you're going to get that callback. What you really want to do is don't ask the user to continue if that particular person that was selected only has a single email address. You don't really need to show that single email address and go on. So what we're doing here is if we have emails for that person and there's only one email for that person, we're going to go ahead and send the email immediately. Otherwise, we're going to go, okay, we're not done, so you should continue. And this is what this delegate callback is asking. should we continue after selecting a person? That means if you select the person, should the picker actually display that person? If you say no, that means the picker will just stay there. And at that point, you need to dismiss that picker. So let's say that person has 2 email addresses. We actually say yes, continue. Then when the user actually picks an individual email address, we're going to get this other callback. Should continue after selecting lots of things. And here, in all cases, we're going to dismiss. If we had a person and everything, we're going to get the email address and send the email. And say no. It's very important that you say no at that point, because otherwise, Edgework will do whatever the default action is. If you're picking an email, that person will get called. If you're picking a phone number, that person will get called. So you probably don't want to do that. The should continue after selecting the person property identifier. We'll go on to the default action. All right, and this looks like exactly what I had in the slide. So you go, send an email. When I click there, you're going to get the callback. Oh, do we need to actually do something? John Appleseed only has 1 email. In this case, the do send email doesn't actually send the email because we don't have an email client in the simulator. So it's not very helpful. But if I pick somebody who has 2 email addresses, despite the fact they don't look like email addresses, then we're going to get the next view. Then you can pick the actual email address, copy it, and we're actually going to give you the second callback, and you can send the email.
So does Kate have phone number data there, and how is that hidden?
So that's an excellent question. The question was, does Kate have phone number data in there, and how is that hidden? When we present the people picker, this is here, we're creating that people picker, setting ourselves as the delegate, and then setting the displayed properties. And that's the important bit. Here, we're only interested in email properties. So we're saying the only property I want you to display is the emails, and that's all. Excuse me. That is all that will get displayed. I totally forgot that. All right. Any other questions? Excuse me. All right, so that was a little demo how to use the picker and actually send an email to friends. Don't spam all your friends. So again, just create the people picker navigation controller. Yes?
What do you mean it says that there's no email simulator on the simulator? What do you mean by that?
I'm sorry? I didn't.
You said something like you don't have an email thing on the simulator.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The question was, what did I mean when I said there was no email on the simulator? There's no email client. The mail app isn't available on the simulator, so I can't actually go through the process of sending the email, just for the demo purposes. It would actually work on the device. If you take that sample code and put it on a phone, it will actually bring up mail and have an email. But it just doesn't work in the simulator. That's why it dismissed and did nothing. So again, the people picker, the 3 delegate callbacks, and then you're good to go. Last thing I'm going to talk about very briefly is when you want to store people for later, to restore data later. Wow. It's a sign I should stop talking. The only thing you can really hold on to for storing people is the record identifier. I mentioned it briefly in one of the demos. You can get that record identifier, serialize, deserialize, and then look it up in address book. What this looks like, you get the record ID from the person, put in an S number, serialize that S number by putting in your prefs or something. Then you deserialize it, you get the number from the prefs, potentially. You get the person ID as an integer, and then you use this function, AB address book get person record ID, to retrieve the record. That person could have changed, or that database could have changed, so check before you're actually trying to display that person. This record ID might not correspond to any person at that point. Excuse me. So again, check that it's not null before you actually do anything with it. The last thing is, if the database changes while you're actually running, if you want to update your UI, you can register for callbacks and get notified when something happens and some other process changes the address book. If there's a sync in the background, there's a push from MobileMe, and the address book, a new contact is added, you can be notified of that. And this is how you register for a callback. Maybe address book register external change callback. Something to do with it, you could refresh your list of people, for example. Make sure that you actually have the most up-to-date UI. And if somebody added a contact to their phone, they want to see that. So you can reload the data. There's a little thing in there, AB address book revert. By default, when you get the change callback, nothing will happen in the address book. You have to call AB address book revert in order to get that new data loaded. That also means you will lose, AB address book revert will lose any changes you've made so far in your app. So make sure, make sure you're only calling this if you've saved all your changes. Right, you can either revert or ignore the changes. If you have changes in progress, you probably don't want to revert. If you don't have anything important that you need to save, then revert. Threading and change callbacks, I mentioned that you can have multiple address book instances. It works the same way as another process. You will also get change callbacks when something changes in other address book. And that was it. So again, the address book framework, look through the headers. It's all C, but it's not that different from Objective-C, I promise. And you can, toll-free bridge a lot of the classes. And the view controllers for presenting people. There are 4 different view controllers in the address book. One I didn't mention at all, which is the new person view controller. That also has slightly different behaviors. It's typically for presenting, when you're creating a new contact, and has a cancel and a save button, and behaves in slightly different ways. There's the regular person view controller, the unknown person view controller, and the people picker. So all those have slightly different use cases. Any questions? It's too late for questions, isn't it? Questions? Still not. All right. Thank you very much.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.